you felt that if you went up there, that you would also die or be hurt?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you complete your answer as to why you thought you would also be killed if you went up there?
I couldn't imagine anyone going through that without having a gun. I couldn't picture it.
Man, can you imagine in this guy's shoes? He's hearing these weird sounds, and he's basically in the house, different part of the house, and then he calls the cops out there, and he is, he's freaking out. We're going to see that footage coming up here in just a couple of moments. Alexis Rosenberg is here. Corey Pegues. Corey, let me ask you from an investigative standpoint here, what the cops are doing when they arrive at a scene like this and they're evaluating this guy who is kind of sketchy, very nervous, and scared. How do they approach this situation?
Well, yeah, we'll show the body camera, but you can see that he was very nervous. Initially, the cops were probably looking at him as a possible suspect just because of his mannerisms. He was very evasive, he couldn't remember things. And to say that, like what he just said on the stand, from 4 hours, you allowed your roommate, you heard the glass break, you heard some screaming, then 4 hours later you heard her like blood-curdling screams. This is what he says. He still doesn't go up there. I'm not surprised if the cops was looking at him. They had to rule him out as a suspect, quite obvious, or even acting in conjunction with the alleged murderer. Because his story, if you just listen to it, it absolutely really makes no sense. But I know the cops was there, got the information. I love how they cleared the home when they went into the home. I don't know if we're going to show that. They went into the home. It was textbook clearing the location until they was able to locate the body. And obviously they had him in custody just for questioning, and they ruled him out. Obviously they ruled him out.
Yeah, and Alexis, one of the key issues in this case, in this time lapse that Corey mentions, is important because there's a lying in wait allegation here, and there is evidence of that if, in fact, Mr. Pershouse is the true culprit in this case. Talk about the importance of that issue and the impact it has on a jury.
Well, I mean, the lying in wait obviously puts us in death penalty zone, although, as we know, or it's come out, it's likely that the death penalty is going to be abolished in California in the near future. But, I mean, to have this man laying or waiting in this house until she comes home is scary. I mean, it really is scaring, and I think that's going to have a major effect on the jury. Yeah,
I mean, it just adds this is not a legal term, but it adds another layer of creepiness to the whole thing. And your point about the death penalty in California is so interesting. I've been following it for years. It's my home state. They've had the death penalty forever. Gavin Newsom decided to, even though the public voted not just to keep the death penalty, but to increase the speed with which it's imposed, he decided to make his own ruling on that. And so it's somewhat, right now it's technically a moratorium. That's all we know. So let's look now at some of the body cam that we've been talking about. Again, this is the guy who we just heard on the stand, Michael Herman. He's the roommate of the victim, Amy Harwick, in this case. Watch how this unfolded. It's amazing.
Let me ask you this. The first officers who arrived at the scene, did you tell them that you heard muffled screams?
I assume so. I don't remember exactly word for word what I told the officers.
So
then.
It's your recollection that you did tell them you had heard muffled screams?
Objection. Misstates the testimony.
Right, sustained. As phrased.
So you don't know whether or not you told them?
I don't remember how I told them.
Okay. Did you tell the first officers who responded that Amy was yelling the entire time? She was upstairs yelling when I ran out of the house.
Yeah, I don't remember that specifically.
And today you testified that she was not screaming the entire time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you tell any of the officers or detectives on February 15th that you heard the sound of a plate breaking?
And what date was that?
February 15th.
Okay, are you referring to the phone call I had with the detectives?
I'm talking about the date, the morning of February 15th. where you were woken by Amy's
Okay,
screams?
okay, I'm just bad with the date, the timeline part. No, I didn't. I didn't remember that for a couple weeks.
And who was the first person you told about hearing something break when you remembered a couple of weeks later?
It was Robert Koshland.
And after you spoke to Robert Koshland, that's when you called the police?
Yeah, I didn't think it was that important, and Robert felt it was, and told me to call the detectives and tell them.
And isn't it true that on February 20th, the date that you called the detectives, that was the first time you ever told the detectives that you heard anything like choking?
I don't remember. I just don't remember.
But your testimony today is that you heard choking on February 15th.
Yeah, and I believe in the 911 call, they cut me off as I'm saying it.
Okay, so a little more foundational information from Michael Herman. We are going to get to that body cam footage coming up, though. Corey Pegues is here, Alexis Rosenberg. Corey, so now you've got a guy who says, well, yeah, you know, I went there, but there was no intention of hurting her. I just kind of wanted to do a drop-in. Sounds a little unbelievable, but how do you go about finding the evidence you need to disprove that alibi?
Well, listen, the district attorney did an exhaustive investigation to rule out some of the things. This guy is just, he's all over the place. He's all over the place. He hears this muffler, he hears a glass break or whatever he heard break. He hears these blood gurgling, screaming. And the first person he tells is somebody else. He doesn't even call 911. He doesn't go up to the location. So this was a difficult person to deal with. The next day he had conflicting evidence, and then that was the 15th. On the 20th, 5 days later, he's coming with new information. Now, I know as an officer, this is probably one of the most traumatic days that he had in his life. So he should really be remembering stuff, but I also know with witnesses, when something happens, you think, the perpetrator had on the blue shirt, come to find out that he had on the green shirt, because, you know, the mind is not really working, but he's really all over
and
the place.
eyewitness testimony is the worst. It's
Right.
the worst form of evidence. You would think it's great, it's direct evidence, but no, circumstantial evidence becomes far more credible. And when you see a witness like this, perhaps, Alexis, you understand why. Yes, traumatic that night, but it affects your perception, it affects your recollection, and this guy probably didn't enjoy sitting on the stand reliving it after, you know, a few years. Tell me your thoughts on the deal, I'll call it, that they're together, you know, as a couple for a very short period of time, you know, 10 years earlier. And then he runs into her again at an event, and it seems to trigger one of those, you know, hey, if I can't have you, nobody can kind of responses. How do you think that plays with a jury?
Well, first, this witness, I mean, I would think the stronger defense is maybe he did it based on his actions and his testimony. But, I mean, the fact that he, from a female perspective, that he basically was so obsessed that it takes this one trigger so many years later to send him over the edge is really scary. I don't know the makeup of this jury, but I hope that there are more men, because this is terrifying. This is kind of like a dating nightmare that that's being presented in this trial.
Yeah, and one of the odd wrinkles is that there was such a delay. You would think if that obsession existed back then, it never would have ended until something ugly happened. But no, it was kind of dormant for a while. Bizarre. This is the Purse House case we are continuing to follow. They are going to get back at it this week, we believe. We're going to take a break. Come right back to Law and Crime. So, you know, you can imagine this roommate, you saw how he was reacting to what was happening, and then to come upon the scene of Amy Harwick, not yet dead, at the base of this third floor balcony. Traumatic to say the least. So I want to talk about, Alexis Rosenberg is here, Corey Pegues. Corey, I want to talk about this syringe with the nicotine in it. I mean, I haven't heard a lot about that. I wouldn't know that it was fatal. Is it used to debilitate somebody, do you think? Or can it be fatal? What's your take on, in your experience, that drug or that weapon?
Yeah, well, I'm not a medical expert, so I don't know, but I know if you put some foreign material on somebody, like nicotine, it probably would
Have you seen
something.
that before? Though something as odd as that?
I've
I mean, you know,
never
I can
seen
think
that.
of, you know, a drug, you know,
Yes.
heroin, or I mean, some other
Right.
but where do you even get liquid nicotine? I don't know. I don't get out enough. I guess. I don't know where you get that.
I've never seen that at all in my career. And do we know for sure if he injected into her? I haven't heard that in the case yet. If he actually, they found the syringe on the scene. But I want to get back to the beginning of the question about the police. They did a very good job. This police work was almost textbook. How they get to the scene, take control. This is what police officers do. Come to the scene, you know, gather information and then deploy resources, personnel, or information out to responding officers. And I mean, I just can't say enough about how textbook. Calm down. Be quiet. We need to get the information. We need to get the information because, you know, police take, especially today's 9/11, and people beat police up a lot. I just want to put it out there. We're looking at these police officers that came to the scene, was very professional, got the information that they needed, and went in. And
A
found
positive
the body.
story about the police. That's just, that's crazy, Corey. What are you trying to
Today.
do there? Alexis, do you know where to get liquid nicotine, just in case someday I need to get some? Do you have any clue where you get that?
I mean, if I had to guess, I would say that you could probably go to one of those vape shops or something like that, and then
okay.
yeah. But I mean, the nicotine is very interesting because they could not figure out what the substance initially was, and they had to have the actually send it off to the FBI to determine it. And it is also questionable that if it was actually input in the system, I think now they can test it, but they wouldn't normally be testing. You know, the medical examiner for high doses of nicotine. And she wasn't a smoker. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe he heard about this on some crime show. Obviously now the defense is saying that it was going to be a murder-suicide or his intent was to, you know, kill himself with it.
Yeah, as we look at the syringe there, I mean, I don't know how full it might have been, but the plunger is depressed pretty far down to very, very little left in it. So either it was initially a very small dose or it was a much larger dose and some of it went somewhere. And at this point, we're not sure exactly what's going on with this because they're not into this part of the evidence yet, but they will be soon. This is the case against Gareth Pursehouse, and it is it's a murder case. It's in California. Death penalty is on the table, as gray as that may be there in California. Let's take a break.